Hey there, my name is Tyler Harrington. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going behind the scenes of this film.
Growing up in Baltimore, Maryland, I really like computer technology. Then my mom, she's a teacher. During the summers, they let her take a Macintosh computer home. I was introduced to things that I never saw before. I was like mesmerized by what I can create. Creating and designing websites was my first foray into creativity.
Specifically, we're going to be breaking down and looking at all aspects of the interview portion of this film. So I've busted out the pen and the tablet today. So we're going to do some drawing, do some breakdowns of behind the scenes photos, break down the setup, the gear, the location, all the stuff you need to know about what made this interview possible. There's a lot more that goes into it than might meet the eye, so let's jump into it. Okay, so first of all, the location. This was actually at a active co-working space in downtown Washington, DC, which presented a lot of problems that we had a very few control over a lot of the variables. So there was music playing, there was a lot of air conditioners going, there was people moving around and walking, elevators opening and closing, lots of things going on. What we ended up deciding on in terms of a location was this conference room that you can see here. So Chip did actually rent this conference room out, which was nice. So this is the A frame that we're going to be talking about here today. You can see it's a nice wide shot. This was shot with the Canon C70 with the 35mm T1.5 CNE prime. You can see we've got some nice light coming here with some nice fall off right here on his face. We have our windows over here that we are holding as much as we also can. We're losing a little bit of data up here. We'll talk about that in a minute. And yeah, so we've got his eye line looking this way into the frame. In terms of our thirds, you can see like third. This is hard to do on a big monitor. Third. You can see he's right here on our rule of thirds. Nice looking frame. We've got a nice eye catch light in his eye. Looking good. And then for our B cam, this is the Canon C70 as well with a 50mm 1.2. The reason why it's so much tighter than the A cam is because the A cam actually has the speed booster on it, which is making it like a true 35, whereas this is on the cropped, it's a cropped 50, so it's closer to an 85. But you can see the same thing here. We've got the nice light fall off right here, a little bit of Rembrandt lighting under his eye, looking good. We have some shadow over here, but it's not too much. Nice catch light in the eye. And yeah, I just like the way that this frame looks. I think that this is a really good looking frame. So let's break it down. Okay, so here's a wide shot of the room. As you can see, even though this is a pretty big room, I don't know if you can tell from this super wide angle shot, but this is a pretty big room, but we had a pretty tight setup just because of this table right here. This table was causing lots of problems. We couldn't move it, so it kind of caused us to have this really, really tight space right here, which really isn't very much space at all. But in terms of gear, we have over here, we have the 200D, and this is bounced off the ceiling, and this is just filling in this back wall right here and providing a little bit of rim on his shoulder here. Now, the reason why this is really important is because the way we have them positioned with these lights, we actually remember, if you remember, we have the window in the frame. This light, which is the 300D, was at full power, 100% power, to try and match this window. And with the full power on him plus the window, this would have all been very, 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 very dark without any sort of light on it. So this is, I'm pretty sure, also at 100% power, bouncing off the ceiling, and just providing a little bit here. We want it to bounce because we don't want it to, there's obviously no light coming from those, no real light coming from over here. So in order to have it be look natural, we want it to just kind of be coming from the ceiling and just providing just some fill. It doesn't need to have any sort of direction. It's just fill. That's why it's bounced off of the ceiling and not more direct or whatever. So that is filling in all this back here just to give it a little bit of, just to bring the room levels up just a little bit to compete with this window and this light here. This is the Light Dome version 2 from Aperture. You can see here we have our microphone and our boom pole and a C-stand. So this is the advantage of having a really nice boom pole and a long boom pole. The only place I could get this was I had the C-stand all the way across the table. And I know that's hard, again, hard to tell from this diagram here, or this picture, but this table was probably, I don't know, 5 feet wide. I think it was a really wide table. So having this extended really far out and having a nice boom pole is super, super helpful. And then one important thing to note here that's really crucial is the placement of James here, who is the interviewer, and then Chip, who is our interviewee. So whenever I do interviews, it's really important that the interviewer and the interviewee are looking at each other the entire time. And my eye lines and everything are based off of that. So James is positioned in a way that you can see he's kind of tucked in this corner awkwardly, but that's because he needs to have really good eyesight with Chip, and Chip has good eyesight with him, and they're just looking at each other the entire time throughout the interview. It makes the interviewer feel much more comfortable, like they're just having a conversation with a person as opposed to thinking about all the cameras and lights and all that sort of stuff. But it also helps to keep their eye line locked in and they're looking the same way and consistent, all that sort of stuff. So that is really, really important. Okay, so here is a tight shot of sort of the back of the cameras. We have two Atomos Shinobis here that I use for just referencing and framing and things like that. It's also easier for James, who is kind of helping me. He's both the interviewer, but also sort of like directing and producing and whatever you want to call this project. So it helps him to have a bigger monitor to see that doesn't have all the text and all that sort of stuff on it. You can see in terms of where these cameras are placed, they're just right around Chip's eye line. They're not super far apart, but as you can see that this is literally like pretty much touching this table. So they're far enough apart to create two, different looking frames that aren't super drastic. I think that they're just far enough apart that I like the way this is framed. And then down here we have our Zoom F6. I use this for big corporate shoots and things like this because it has 32-bit float for YouTube stuff or whatever. A lot of times I'll just run the XLR straight into the camera, but I like having the security of 32-bit float for big projects like this that we can't do again. All right, so here's the last shot we're gonna look at. Just a little bit tighter shot here. So here's the microphone. You can see that it is just in front of him, pointed right around his like chin, chest area. That's kind of where you want to aim microphone so that when he's speaking through the cone, the pickup pattern. You don't want it too close to the top of his head. You don't want it too far away. It's just barely out of frame. There's actually, for the first like 3 minutes of the interview, it was in the frame. That's how close you want it, but it's just barely out of frame. Right there, sounding good. And one really important thing to note here is going to be the placement of this light. Now, you can see I'm literally working with every inch that I have. This is crammed up here in this corner, touching this wall as far over here as possible. Now, the reason for this is because we want this key light to feel motivated. With these windows here, the light is naturally going to be coming from this direction. Now, it would have been easier, and maybe like if this was maybe your first rodeo, you would have maybe wanted to put the light over here, kind of shining this way because it's a little bit easier. We'll just use a window light and we'll balance it out and whatever. The problem with that is that it feels very unnatural because there's no natural light source coming from this side of the room. The window is the natural light source. Especially when you see the window in the frame, you need to have your light source coming from there. So we crammed it over here as best as we could, up and out of the way of the cameras, up here as high as we can get it, and we have it set to 100% power. Now, the reason that is because we're trying to hold as much data in this window as we possibly can, and the only way to do that is to get him, Chip, to be as bright or brighter than what's happening outside here. Now, we got lucky in that we have a building here and we have some trees, but in the final frame, which we'll look at in 1 second, you'll see that there was a little section of sky up here that we just couldn't hold. We did the best we can, but this light just wasn't bright enough to be as powerful or as bright as the sky in this particular shot. But it's really important that we have the light coming from the window side. And then we have our B camera on the shadow side. So we always want to be shooting from this shadow side. So this would be the lit side. Here comes the light. Here's the shadow. We want our B cam on the shadow side. It gives it a much more cinematic, dramatic sort of feel. Again, if you place your A cam first and then you're deciding, which side do I put my B cam? Always on the shadow side, okay? If you had this on this side, you would be on the same side as the light and you would lose all that nice shadow detail and everything on this side of his face. You'd only be getting the bright side of the light. And in this particular case, you would have probably like this TV in your frame and like all this ugly stuff back here. So we don't want that. We want the shadow side. All right, so now let's jump into Premiere and let's look at the vector scope for this. This is with the LUT on here. Let's see here. This is just the LUT and nothing else. No other corrections. Literally just a C-Log2 conversion LUT. I get mine from Tyler Stallman. I'll link to that below. This is just with the conversion LUT. Okay, so let's see what we're looking at here. So right here, you can see these two little spots right here. See how it's flat? See over here, it's flat-ish, but it's kind of like a soft flat. Over here, we have a very hard flat line. This is where we're peaking, right? Even with the 16 stops of dynamic range coming out of the C70, we're still peaking, and that's this area right up here. Like I said, I did everything I could to try and hold this, and I had the light at 100% brightness, got as close to him as I could. There was just no way I was gonna hold this. I guess so. Luckily, this building over here, even though it is a white building, it's still not as bright as the sky. So if this was all sky out here, this shot wouldn't have worked. But because we have some trees over here in this building and all this sort of stuff over here, we are able to hold most of this frame. So I felt like this was gonna look good. I really like the way that it looks. I like having the light up here. I love that it's motivated. It almost doesn't feel like it's lit, and that's kind of the goal. You don't want it to look super, super lit. If we take both of these off, you can see even in C-Log 2, this is what we're getting. And it was just, I knew it when we were shooting it. I could see it in the false color. It was just, I was like, this is gonna be fine. This is gonna be good enough. This is gonna be great. Everything is looking good. His skin tones right here, perfectly right around 70. This is exactly what you want. This is looking good. And then if we switch over to the B cam, same thing. Again, we've got this nice shadow fall off over here. Right here, see how this is, again, it's still really close to being flat, but it's not quite as harsh of a line. So like technically this data over here, we're getting really close to losing it. But it's not quite at 100 and it's not perfectly flat. So it's really, really close. But again, for this shot and just what we were working with and the time constraints and all this sort of stuff, I'm really happy with the lighting and the way that it's coming across, the way that it's perfectly framed underneath his eye with this nice shadow fall off. And I just think that it looks really good. So if we go from here, if we were looking at our lumetri color panel here, let's see here, we've got a little bit of contrast. We're adding a little bit of warmth, adding a little bit of magenta, and we're opening up the shadows just slightly. It was a little shadowy because he's wearing a black shirt, so we wanted to bring back a little bit of that detail. But yeah, so that's basically what we're looking at for the final frame. We've got shot 1, shot 2. That's what we got. Oh, and of course, we're looking at his eye line, so you can see, he's looking through the frame the whole way. Same thing here. Good eye lines. When you jump from here to here, it doesn't feel super jarring. It's different enough that it feels like a different shot, slightly different angle, plus the compression, all that good stuff. But it doesn't feel too jarring, right? You want it to be somewhere in the middle there. And I think that this really achieves that. All right, so there you have it. That is everything that went into the making of this shot here. If you want to watch the final film, I'll link that down below. Go check out Chip. Go check out Show It, who I worked on this project with. Great company. Chip's a great guy. Definitely highly suggest you go check out the full film. But yeah, hopefully this was helpful. I love doing interviews and stuff like this, and it's been something that I've been really working on developing and getting better at over the years. As you can see, there's a lot of little decisions that go into everything in terms of camera placement, where you put your interviewer, where you place all your stuff, and all that jazz. So it's a lot, but it's, the final image kind of speaks for itself. And when you look at it, when you look at the final frame, I feel like it looks pretty simple. It doesn't look super crazy, especially the way we have this one lit. You can't even really tell hardly that it is lit, but you can see that a lot went into making it look that way. So yeah, so hopefully you found this helpful. If you enjoyed this type of behind the scenes breakdown of the equipment and the gear and all that sort of stuff, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to make more like this. I have I love a good interview setup, and my favorite part is that it's always different. There's always different challenges to overcome every time you sit down to do an interview like this. So I have lots of good examples like this with lots of good behind the scenes photos and stuff like that. So if you want to see more, let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe if you want to see those upcoming. And yeah, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.